Premier, the NDP has proposed helping people at the pump. Alberta, I know, just announced pausing its provincial fuel tax for a little while. Have you thought about that at all, and what can you tell people about whether you're considering doing that?
Yes, we have been giving some thought as to what we will do in the in weeks and months ahead, understanding that we're seeing price of fuel increase and other cost of living metrics that are increasing, in part due to the world starting to find its way through COVID, in part due to the conflict that we see with Russia invading Ukraine. So most certainly we are starting to have these discussions as to what we would do if there was potential revenues increases, in particular revenue increases due to the price of oil. We see what's happening in Alberta, a province that's much more reliant on fluctuations in the price of oil as far as their provincial budget is. We're much more diversified. We have a much more diversified economy here in Saskatchewan. So understanding that it is temporary, that we do have a much larger diversity in our economy in Saskatchewan, we are looking at what would potentially this look like. So looking at things like debt repayment, operating debt that this province has due to COVID. We've invested close to $3 billion in supporting Saskatchewan people over the course of the past 2 years through this global pandemic. Looking at what, and we have an operating debt that we inherited, quite frankly, from the NDP a number of years ago that is still in existence. Looking at, should we be looking at if there's a significant amount of revenue here, moving on some type of savings account on behalf of the people of the province, but also thirdly looking at, is there an opportunity for us, understanding this is the people of Saskatchewan's resource, to look at a way to return some of that directly to the people of Saskatchewan in some way. And so we're in the early stages of looking at that, likely at a different level than maybe a province like Alberta that is largely dependent on fluctuations in the energy industry, in the oil price per se. But I would just go on to say that what we are seeing occur in Ukraine, Russia, the relationship with other countries that purchase from Russia, this is a very important conversation for us to have in Canada and for us to have in North America around our energy security, our continental energy security, our continental food security, and ultimately our economic sovereignty. We need to take care of ourselves. We still import oil from other areas of the world, including Russia, into Canada. That needs to stop. And we need to look at how we are going to provide some of the most sustainable oil in the world, which is produced right here in Saskatchewan, how we're going to provide that to other Canadians, and how we're going to provide that to other people across North America to provide that continental energy security so that we don't find ourselves in the perplexing situation that we see other countries in today.
I was going to just ask quickly, the Mayor of Regina says that Evraz should sell to avoid sanctions because it's Russian-owned. Do you have any thoughts on that, and just Evraz in general, maybe some concerns that people that work there, it's a large employer in the city, its effect on what's happening in Russia?
Yeah, well, I would maybe just a little bit higher level comment on Evraz and other areas where Russian oligarchs will actually intersect with what our North American economy, much more so in other countries around the world. There are impacts when Canada and the U.S. start to put sanctions in. Those sanctions that are targeted at having a maximum effect on Russia so that they back down on their unauthorized and quite frankly, quite egregious invasion of Ukraine, and totally unnecessary invasion of Ukraine. That's what those sanctions are focused at. With all of those sanctions, there are consequences. There's consequences in Canada. For example, we see the energy price starting to rise. We see other costs of living metrics that are starting to rise, and we're looking very closely at that as a government. To move on, major employers that employ Saskatchewan and Canadian people, that's a different level of conversation. That's one that I think our Minister of Trade and Export would ultimately be having, and I don't know that that's happened at this point in time. The sanctions have not targeted someone like Evraz at this point in time, but that conversation would be happening at that level ultimately in the days ahead. Listen.
And federal level, would it be happening at the provincial and federal level on joint
I would hope so, so that the full impacts could be discussed, and the impacts to be very large in Saskatchewan with a minority shareholder that happens to be a Russian oligarch. And
it's a bit of a difficult situation. You also want pipelines, and they're providing the pipe.
Yeah.
You know, so where does
it's an ownership issue as opposed to what they are doing and the product that they.
Because they've also profited off that, which is problematic. What I'm getting at is where does this conversation start? Because as you point out, it's complicated as hell, like because of everything else that's involved.
Well, I think where you see the federal government going and the provincial government has been in a small part of these conversations on what the impact is targeting a number of commodities that have the maximum impact on Russia and on Russia's ability to garner wealth. Banning the imports of Russian oil into Canada is a good place to start. The Canadian government is moving on operationalizing that. There's no reason for us to be bringing in oil from anywhere around the world, consequently, but in particular bringing it in from Russia, making Russian oligarchs much more wealthy in doing so, and bringing in, quite frankly, dirtier oil than we produce even here in Saskatchewan. And so there is a balance as to ensuring that the sanctions that are in place have maximum impact on Russia, and a minimum impact on Canadians, and in this case, people in Regina, Saskatchewan.
One more quick one for me is for Adam's first question. What can you do at this point to realistically provide immediate relief when that would naturally be coming down in the budget? And I'm guessing you have the budget coming down about 17 days from now. You don't really have time to adjust it or adjust much in the budget. Is there something that you can either rework or add or some flexibility in terms of providing that relief that was talked about in the House and you've readdressed?
Well, there's a number of operational things, and you're correct. There is a budget that will be coming out, and you'll see, and I think, in fairness, in that budget, pardon me? Yeah. Be coming very shortly, in a matter of just a couple of weeks or a little better. And the fact of the matter is in that budget you are going to see significant investments in Saskatchewan people. We're coming through a global pandemic, 2 years of a global pandemic. You're going to see significant investments in healthcare, in all of the areas where we have seen some challenges over the course of the last 2 years, and accumulated challenges that we need to invest in to ensure that we're providing the services, the healthcare services to Saskatchewan people that we can, and ensuring that we have the supports in place for our frontline healthcare employees that we can. And so you're going to see a very robust and solid budget already that is investing in the services that Saskatchewan people ultimately expect. As we move through what is a very dynamic revenue situation, could potentially be a very temporary revenue situation. We're in day 12 of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and we're seeing natural resource commodities move very quickly. No one knows how long this invasion is going to occur. We hope soon it'll end sooner rather than later. And so we are focused first and foremost on supporting Russian people and getting to Saskatchewan, supporting them financially, but also looking at what we can do in the months ahead should this invasion play out for an extended period of time, to ensure that we're providing all of the supports for Saskatchewan people as we see the cost of living start to increase, partially due to the invasion in Ukraine, but partially also due to the global economy starting to rev its engine again.
Just so I'm clear, is lowering the excise tax on the table?
That's not something I would say that we're actively looking at today. Again, part of that reason would be Alberta is much more reliant on the oil price than we are in Saskatchewan. We have a much more diversified natural resource-based economy. We have uranium. Alberta does not have uranium. They have about 10 times the energy sales that we have in Saskatchewan, or not quite. But we have uranium, we have a larger agriculture sector, we have a potash sector. All of that comes into where we are here in Saskatchewan with respect to the revenues that we're receiving. And so we're having these discussions now. I'm not going to say that anything is off the table, but if there is an opportunity for us to provide some supports to Saskatchewan people, understanding that we have a provincial deficit that needs to be addressed. Some of that has been increased past 2 years in providing about $3 billion in COVID supports to Saskatchewan people, understanding that we have always committed to having a savings account on behalf of Saskatchewan people, but also understanding that the cost of living as these natural resource prices increase, yes, we're the beneficiary by providing jobs and attracting investment and providing opportunities in Saskatchewan, but as individuals, we're also paying more at the pumps and more at the grocery store. And so we're looking at what we can do to support Saskatchewan people, understanding it's their resource. They own the resource.
Everyone here is going to hate me, but I'm sorry, guys. So you're not going to reduce the gas tax that we charge for
I would say it's not under active consideration, but there's nothing that's been removed from the table.
And then can I get your reaction to Alberta deciding to do that for its residents?
Well, as I said, Alberta's provincial revenues are very much more reliant on the energy price. And Alberta has had some significant challenges over the course of the last couple of years, in particular, when the energy price was reduced to, I think, negative $7.50. So Alberta, as the energy price increases, for what period of time, we don't know. And I think that's why they've put some triggers in place to ensure that it will be removed at some point in time as well. You know, Alberta's free to do what they need to do. We are actively looking at what can we do to support Saskatchewan people through, you know, a cost of living increase that isn't just solely on one commodity, a cost of living increase that is across the board. So that's the discussions that we're having, and we'll continue to have them for a while. As I said, we're in day 12 of this conflict, which is you know, very much part of what we're seeing, and in particular in the increase in the oil price, the global oil price. We don't know how long this conflict will go, so those are the discussions the government's having.
And where would you like to see that extra revenue that comes in from these high oil prices go to?
Well, that's, you know, we're looking at 3 areas. One is, you know, debt reduction. We have a significant debt over the course of the last 2 years, and all of the economic supports, the healthcare supports that we have provided from the government on behalf of Saskatchewan people. 2, we inherited some operational debt from the previous NDP government. 3, we've always committed to a savings account. I don't know if this is a time for us to look at that. But 4 is the last, but certainly not least, is understanding that this is the Saskatchewan people's resource, whether it's energy, whether it's the land, whether it's you know, the uranium, the potash that we sell around the world. And so we are actively having discussions as to, you know, how long do we feel this conflict is going to be in place? How long do we feel the inflated natural resource prices are going to be in place? People of Saskatchewan own it. They're experiencing a cost of living increase. You know, what can we do to support them?
Does it rapidly change the numbers? I'm just kind of wondering, because you're sounding like a guy that's going to present a balanced budget, and I would have bet otherwise.
Yeah, well, if you could tell me, you know, we see the price of oil. That obviously, when we come out with our budget, our estimate on the price of energy, price of various commodities is on an annualized basis. And so you often will, and we talk about this every budget year, is how oil is up and down, but we have to take it on an annualized basis for an annual budget that we put together. So you know, understanding that part of what is driving these record oil prices is the conflict in Ukraine. Part of what is driving higher oil prices to begin with is the revving of the global economic engine as we see countries start to find their way through COVID-19. So there's 2 prongs to this, and what we're doing is having some discussions as to, you know, what is temporary and how long potentially could that last, and I don't think anyone knows the answer to that. And then ultimately, what will the ongoing price of oil be?
Can you compare this to 2020 budget in the sense that you were kind of really caught because COVID hit you pretty quickly and you guys had to scramble to, in essence, scrap the budget you had and present one a few months later? I don't think we're quite there in terms of that, but has there been a lot of rewriting because of what's been happening in terms of?
On the revenue side, I think in fairness, it's changing daily, and we've seen it change. As we said, we're only 12 days into this conflict. We've seen, you know, a number of revenue items change, and we'll probably see that throughout the next, you know, however long this conflict is going to happen. What we are tasked with from a budgetary perspective is, and you're right, 2020 was equally challenging on the revenue side and the expense side, as to for different reasons, actually the opposite reasons, as we saw our revenue numbers start to decrease as the world started to slow down for COVID. We now see the world starting to reopen and rev its economic engine in what we hope will be a post-COVID environment. And then we see this conflict that also is having an impact, further impact on all natural resources, not just oil, all natural resources. And so we are going to see some variability in the days ahead, likely in a very opposite way that we saw as we went into COVID. And we're going to manage our way through those as a government on behalf of the people of this province.
Right now we get COVID.
Can't the government be nimble, take the tax off now, put it back on when things change?
And those are precisely the discussions that we're attempting to have. As I said, we're in day 12. Day 12 of this conflict that is in a large part is responsible for the record energy prices that we're seeing now and some of the push on some of the other natural resource prices as well. If the conflict was to end tomorrow, we would likely see some leveling of some of these rates around the world. So ultimately, what we're attempting to do in the lead up to the budget is to assess, what do we feel with the best advice that we have, in the same way we did in 2020, which is challenging. Challenging at a time when we're finding our way through COVID-19, challenging at a time when we see this Russian invasion of Ukraine, about trying to find our way through the provincial budget, estimating what the revenue numbers will be. And then we will, work through the year as we see things. We may come, for example, to looking at things on a quarterly basis with our quarterly reports as to what is happening with the natural resource numbers at that point in time and what we ultimately may do with any surpluses or decreases. But we must remember as well, we have come through a very challenging 2 years, 2 years with very little certainty in the way of provincial revenues, in the way of provincial expenses. We knew expenses were increasing. We knew revenues have been challenged. That has been somewhat changed now with finding our way through COVID and this, terrible conflict that the world is finding itself. And so we are, yes, we are focused on where and what we can do for Saskatchewan people to offset the cost of living in the months ahead. We're also very focused right now on how many people we can get out of that area of conflict, out of the Ukraine area, get them to Saskatchewan. We'll take an unlimited number, and we most certainly will support them in any way that we can.
Couple last questions.
So you mentioned this in the House, and I don't know if I missed this, but you're willing to, how much money are you willing to spend to bring as many people in from Ukraine? How much more are you willing to donate to the humanitarian aid there as well?
So we haven't looked at what we would additionally donate to the Canadian-Ukrainian Congress. As far in addition to the 100,000 that we've already provided, we've seen Canadian people step up and donate through third parties, donate directly, even in a time when Saskatchewan people were able to set a record in their own homegrown fundraiser, Tell America, with over $8 million provided to that very reputable and strong Saskatchewan organization with our kinsmen and Kinettes. As far as supporting Ukrainian people that can get to Saskatchewan, that number will be there. We have not attached a number to what we will invest to support Ukrainian people that are fleeing that area of conflict in the world and finding their way to a Saskatchewan community. We have no number that we have budgeted or have set out for that. We have told the federal government that we will accept as many as they can get here.
Can you match donations, private donations, to a cap? Because that's been one suggestion that's been made, I think by the opposition, but by others too.
Yeah, is there other provinces that have done that?
Well, no, I don't think there's other provinces that have actually committed to that, but it's part of the conversation. There are people within this province that committed to that, but that's problematic.
Through our conversations very early in this with the head of our Saskatchewan Ukrainian Relations Advisory Committee and Gerald Lushik, he had advised us, make an early donation and get the awareness out there of what this humanitarian fund is, so that people across Saskatchewan and across Canada can ultimately donate, know where to donate to a reputable organization that is going to ensure that those dollars do get on the ground to support Ukrainian people in this place of conflict. We have turned much of our attention towards how do we get those Ukrainian people here, out of that area of conflict, get them to Saskatchewan, where we can provide the supports, and to your question, whatever those supports are, they'll be provided.
What's the time frame to that early donation? Any thoughts in terms of, is it a matter of weeks, days, I guess, from like...
Well, we did it already. The early donation was $100,000.
Oh, you're talking about that donation, but there'll be probably more. I think people are expecting more than $100,000.
We haven't had discussions about donating more dollars to the humanitarian effort, but I think it's fair to say, as you look at the really the travesties that we're seeing play out on the news day in, day out, that it most certainly wouldn't be off the table. But as I said, what we have turned our focus to is to getting Ukrainian families out of that area of conflict, getting them to Saskatchewan, where we can support them in a Saskatchewan community.
People are expecting sort of something in the term of millions as opposed to 100,000s. I get that's hard on the government.
And again, we haven't had those conversations as of yet.
Just outside of the budget, what can the electors of Saskatchewan expect out of the government over the next 10 weeks?
Well, I think over the next 10 weeks, you're going to see a continued focus on a number of areas, and really leveraging for example, some of the natural resources that we have in this province, the specialized people that we have that add value to those natural resources, and utilizing some of the investments that the government has made. For example, our foreign trade offices, our trade and investment offices that we have in a number of countries around the world, to continue to attract that private investment into the mining industry, both uranium and potash, maybe potentially diamonds, rare earth minerals, to continue to attract that investment into our energy industry, one of the most sustainable energy industries in the world, and to continue to attract that investment into fertilizer production, as well as value-added food production. And we're seeing record investment in all of those sectors. We're seeing uranium mines that are bringing folks back to work as they are restarting their operations, given some more favorable commodity prices. Saskatchewan is in a very good position. I've said this for a number of months now. We're in a very good position to provide the world the food, fuel, and fertilizer that it is going to require as we find ourselves through COVID-19, as the world starts to rev its economic engine. We have a long-term positive vision for this province of attracting investment, providing jobs, providing opportunity for those to move here, possibly in the short term from Ukraine, but in the longer term from countries all around the world. Saskatchewan most certainly is still on target to meet the targets that we had put forward in the plan for growth just a couple of years ago, despite the challenges of the last 2 years and despite the challenges that we see globally right now with the unrest in Ukraine.
Let's get the government to give us more updated COVID numbers in once a week, too, at least the critical numbers. And in my humble opinion, critical numbers start with the death numbers. It seems almost disadvantageous for you guys to present weekly death numbers because it actually in some ways inflates them. Why would you not basically go back to giving us at least that as per the...
Yeah, well, quite frankly, the reason that we have moved to where we are is it is on the advice. It was said in the House. It's on the advice of public health and... It's on the advice, where we are with reporting today is on the advice of public health and Dr. Shahab, which is part way, yeah, but this is part way where we are with other communicable diseases versus where we were reporting on a daily basis with COVID-19.
That doesn't answer the question. Did Dr. Shahab, because we specifically asked him, he gave us an answer, I believe, in terms of why we don't have that, and I believe he said that's a government policy question, not his department. But that was in terms of how they're reporting. If there is that reporting, people can actually get a better assessment of what is the COVID situation themselves without having to wait a week. Yeah. I don't understand why it can't be done on a daily basis. I get why you can't do daily cases numbers anymore and why it would be considered relatively useless. And I get whatever Dr. Shahab might be saying about that. But deaths would be different. Several other things would be different.
Yeah, we moved as per the advice that we received from Dr. Shahab, and that ultimately was... well... You can argue all you like.
That's not what he said to us in terms of that, not specifically related to those figures. Like, and those are the critical ones, obviously.
Well, I think we're going to agree to disagree on how we interpreted things. The fact of the matter is we moved on to a weekly reporting basis on the advice of public health, and most certainly this is part way in between where we were on a daily basis and where ultimately we are with other transmissible diseases that we have in Saskatchewan. And this also provides a number of resources now that are available in public health to start to regain some focus on some of the other important work that public health does across the province, not including child vaccinations, youth vaccinations, as well as tracking some of the other transmissible diseases that we ultimately do work through in a number of our communities across the province. Those are reported on monthly. COVID was daily, now COVID is weekly, and that's done on the advice that we received or the Minister of Health received from public health. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. I did just want to point out there was just, I think you spoke, you said bringing Russian people.
Oh, did I?
Saskatchewan.
I meant Ukrainian.
Early in response to one of your questions, Murray. You provided the same clip later on, so I just wanted to flag that for the tape and audio.
Good for you. Good to hear.